Hello, everyone. Welcome on board and thanks for joining in today. It's a new quarter, Q2, and today we are exploring the topic The Great Controversy, Episode 1. Before we get into it, I would like to give a shout out to my parents, Elder and Mrs. J.I. Ingemanda, for celebrating their 59th year in marriage last weekend. It's been a beautiful journey. God be praised over you. We love you, and we are super duper proud of both of you to many more years. Okay, let's get back to business. Have you ever tried listening to the news or read the papers lately? What did you observe? Have you noticed that the good stuff sparingly ever makes the headlines? It's almost always the bad news, and man, there are loads of them lately. From a variety of terminal diseases defying medicine and ravaging our loved ones till their very last breath, to the unthinkable levels of man's inhumanity to man that would make you cringe. On the other hand, we hear of a loving, caring, merciful God, purportedly in charge of the affairs of his children. Hmm, interesting. Now, if you are thinking what I'm thinking, these two should not end up in the same sentence. But because they are here, we are left with a range of questions like 1. If God is so good, why is the world so bad? 2. How can a God of love allow so much evil to exist? Or you may hear something like this: why do bad things happen to good people? Now, my guess is you must have at some point or the other asked the same questions, or maybe more. And these are great questions and should be addressed. So, let's do that. Let's start from the very beginning. Now, all that we know today about God, heaven, and his government, we do from what God has revealed, chronicled in the Bible. And one of the things we'll learn is that one of the fundamental principles of God's government is that he does not accept coerced or forced obedience. Meaning, I will not be forced to do anything I do not want to do. Like, washing dishes, going to the gym. I'm just kidding. But thus far, that sounds great, right? Now, however, for this to be possible, I must be able to choose freely without coercion. Now, what that means is that for this fundamental principle of God's government to be sustained, all creatures with the capacity to obey must have freedom of choice. So, God made that an inherent part of his blueprint in creating both the angels and mankind. Now, it's important to note that with this gift comes the possibility to freely choose either right or wrong, uncompelled. Again, according to the Bible narrative, up till this point, everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. And it all started in the most unlikely place, in the heart of one of the most beautiful angels in heaven. His name, Lucifer. His office, the covering cherub. And how do you know this? Well, the book of Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 gives us more details. You should check it out. So, what really happened? Well, it goes this way. Lucifer, one of the created angels in heaven, the covering cherub, in exercising his freedom of choice, he coveted the office of God and desired the worship that belonged only to the Creator. In the process, he attempted to usurp God's throne by questioning God's authority. Well, God's first approach, as always, was redemptive. But when that was continually shunned, he resorted to judgment, his last resort. After turning down several efforts to get him to reason failed, in the long run, his rebellion led to an open warfare in heaven. And of course, Satan was kicked out of heaven with a third of the heavenly angels. Now, Having lost his face and place in heaven, this dude came down with great rage. And his game plan was, well, since I cannot contend with God successfully, I can at least frustrate humanity, his handiwork. Now, at this point, this virus, Satan, was still contained, had only successfully infected a third of the heavenly angels. The question is, knowing how successfully deceptive this dude had become, and how fatal leaving him unrestricted and unchecked will prove in the affairs of man, why didn't God just exterminate all the dissenters and start over? Alternatively, why wasn't Eden barricaded from him like it was after the fall? In my opinion, these are great questions. Think about it. Now, what would you think of any ruler, who quickly exterminates any and every voice of opposition that rises against him or her? A tyrant? Dictator? Mean? Exactly. Now, while this may sound like a quick fix, it would have given some credibility to the accusations of Satan against God as being unfair and high handed. Now, while this move may have successfully put out the fire, it would have kindled more in the hearts of the angels who were left in heaven, and maybe us today. And in extension, it would have defeated the very core principle of God's government: obedience, freely giving, not out of fear, but of love. What to remember thus far? One of the fundamental principles of God's government is that He does not accept coerced or forced obedience. So, He has given all creatures with the capacity to obey and worship a freedom of choice. 2. With this gift comes the possibility of choosing either right or wrong uncompelled. 3. God neither created sin nor Satan. Lucifer, in exercising his freedom of choice, initiated sin, becoming Satan. 4. Satan was so convincing that 1/3 of the heavenly angels gave up their allegiance to God for him. Point is, unaided, we are no match for him. Our only hope of victory is in remaining in Christ 24/7. Number 5. God's response to rebellion has always been the same protocol: redemptive. Enlighten the dissenter, patiently give him time to come to terms with the revealed truth without coercion. But when that is continually shunned, God resorts to judgment, his last resort. And finally, I know it may sound like a deja vu, but just like in this scenario, when all is said and done, we will all have to decide to whom we pledge our allegiance to. It is either God or not God. It's that simple. At this point, we were still good. We had nothing to do with any of that. However, in Eden, where God placed Adam and Eve, He had also established a token of this fundamental principle of His government: obedience by choice, not coercion. And there was nothing wrong with this tree of knowledge of good and evil. Its presence was to establish this principle of obedience by choice, but unfortunately, Adam and Eve disobeyed, deceived by the now raging Lucifer turned Satan. When man sinned, a number of things happened. Now, one, initially we were made conditionally immortal. Our immortality was predicated on our continued obedience. Hence the notice: the day you eat of this tree, you shall surely die. We lost certain privileges due to disobedience. Now, the same principle applies today. Now, there's a problem. Since God upholds his words above his name, it implies that God cannot rescind his laws in order to save man. So, what's the way forward? Well, a God who is never taken unawares then activates his plan of salvation. And his plan required that God, in the person of Jesus, in the likeness of man, the seed of the woman, takes our place to pay the wages of sin. The outcome is that whosoever will confess with his mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in his heart that God raised him from the dead will be saved. And just like that, the same problem was cracked and the solution proffered. While we celebrate that, let it settle. It is the same God who created all things and has sustained them by the power of his words that came all the way down, took the beatings, and was suspended on the cross in humiliation for 6 torturous hours, just so that we can be saved. What to remember thus far? Now, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus brings clarity to the character and motives of God towards us. And it avails us all the data that we need to answer the question and accusations of Satan posed about the character of God. Think about it. If Jesus would rather die than rescind his words, the cross further confirms the immutability of the laws of God and how binding they are on us all. Number 3, if the amount of money you are willing to pay for something is a reflection of how much value you place on it, the cross perfectly illustrates how much value that God has placed on us, the life of his Son on the cross. Let that settle. In summary, back to the questions we started with. Number 1, if God is so good, why is the world so bad? And number 2, how can a God of love allow so much evil to exist? The answer to the first 2 questions kind of connected. Now, God could have either made us as robots or as free moral beings. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Bumblebee, but I'd rather be human. Now, being human comes with the gift of freedom of choice, and with that comes the possibility of choosing either right or wrong uncompelled. So the real question actually is, if in exercising our freedom of choice, we choose wrong, is God to blame? Better still, if God compels us against our will to choose right all the time, would that make us free moral beings? Make sense? The bottom line is, God is not to blame here, but he is working on it. And the last question was, why do bad things happen to good people? This is a very good question. So the thing is, when God made man, he also gave him dominion over the earth and all that's in it. So when man sinned, both man and all under his dominion became susceptible to the consequences of sin, introducing all manner of anomalies that we experience today. In addition to that, the hearts of men became continually evil. Now, what this means is, regardless of whether you are good, bad, or ugly, because we have lost certain privileges through the indulgence of sin, by virtue of just being here in this domain that was once under man's dominion, you are susceptible to these anomalies. The good news, however, is it doesn't have to stay that way. We are going home, and soon too. God will yet vindicate the righteous and make it all right again.